At Willow Creek Farm, a generations-old homestead nestled in the rolling hills of Montana, what began as a simple land dispute erupted into one of the most extraordinary tales of courage and justice ever witnessed in the American heartland. When the notorious Iron Valley motorcycle gang targeted what seemed to be just another aging farmer and his family, they never expected to encounter retired Master Sergeant Daniel Foster, a decorated Army Ranger with 2 decades of special operations. Experience who would teach them that true strength lies not in intimidation, but in standing up for what's right. This is the remarkable story of how one quiet farmer's stand against corruption ignited a chain of events that would dismantle a criminal empire and transform hardened outlaws into guardians of the very community they once terrorized, proving that sometimes the deepest roots of justice grow in the most unexpected soil. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Farm's weathered fence posts, painting the Montana landscape in shades of gold and amber. Daniel Foster stood in his wheat fields, calloused hands running through the ripening grain as he assessed this year's crop. 20 years of military service had taught him to read terrain, to spot irregularities, to sense when something wasn't quite right. The distant rumble of motorcycles carried across the valley, an unusual sound for this remote stretch of farmland. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the screen showing a familiar name. Mia, his daughter, calling from her army deployment. Overseas. Daniel smiled, remembering how she'd followed in his footsteps, choosing to serve just as he had. "Morning, sweetheart," he answered, continuing his inspection of the wheat. "You're up early." The static-filled pause spoke of miles between them. "Just checking in, Dad. Everything okay there?" Daniel's eyes tracked the growing rumble of engines, watching dust clouds rise from the access road that led to his property. "Same as always, quiet country living. Dr. Mitchell says my knee's healing. Up nicely after the surgery." "Dad," Mia's voice carried that edge of professional concern he recognized from his own days in the service. "You'd tell me if anything was wrong, right?" The motorcycle sounds grew louder, echoing off the valley walls. Through the morning haze, dark shapes began to materialize. At least 12 bikes, their chrome glinting in the early light. At their lead rode a figure whose very presence seemed to command attention, his leather cut adorned with patches that spoke of territory and violence. Of course I would, but this valley hasn't changed in 100 years. What trouble could possibly find me here? The rumble intensified as the motorcycles drew closer. Through his peripheral vision, Daniel noted their formation, their spacing, their approach angles. Old habits that had kept him alive through countless operations now kicking in automatically. "Dad?" Mia's tone shifted, becoming more alert, more focused. "What's that sound?" Daniel watched as Marcus "Blade" Hawkins, the notorious leader of the Iron Valley gang, cut his engine at the end of the farm's long driveway. His boots hit the gravel with practiced menace, eyes scanning the property with cold calculation. Nothing to worry about, just some morning traffic on the access road. Daniel kept his voice steady, even as more bikes pulled up behind their leader. "The harvest is coming in nicely." "Dad," Mia's military training evident in her clipped tone, "what's really going on?" The old farm gate creaked as Blade pushed. It opened, flanked by 2 massive riders, whose cuts identified them as Rex Hammer Thompson and Jake Switchblade Martinez. Behind them, more gang members spread out, taking positions around the property's perimeter. "I should go," Daniel said calmly, watching the approaching men. "The morning work's calling. I love you, Mia." Through the phone, he could hear his daughter's protests, but he ended the call, sliding the phone into his pocket. His mind was already calculating angles, distances, potential scenarios, assessment protocols ingrained through years of special operations. The morning dew still clung to the wheat as Blade and his lieutenants approached. Daniel continued his inspection of the grain, though his awareness had shifted to full tactical mode, noting weapons bulging under leather cuts, radio earpieces, partially hidden by long hair. The practiced way the gang members moved to maintain overlapping fields of view. "Mr. Foster," Blade called out, his voice carrying across the field with practiced authority. "Interesting operation you've got here." Daniel turned slowly, facing the approaching men with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained through countless high-stakes situations. "We run a simple farm," he replied, his hands remaining visible, relaxed. "Nothing interesting about honest work." Through the morning haze, Daniel could see more gang members establishing positions around his property. Mike Watson, his nearest neighbor half a mile down the road, was already on his porch, phone in hand, no doubt calling Sheriff Roberts. But the sheriff's station was 30 minutes away. Whatever was about to happen, Daniel would have to handle it alone. Blade's smile never reached his eyes as he surveyed the vast fields. Simple farm, maybe, but prime location. Access road to 3 counties runs right through your property. Strategic position. The gang leader's choice of words wasn't lost on Daniel. Military terminology from someone who clearly had his own tactical training. Mike Watson's truck roared to life in the distance, tires kicking up dust as he raced toward town. Some of the gang members tracked his movement, but Blade remained focused on Daniel. "Way we see it," he continued, "this land could be put to better use, more profitable use." Daniel's voice remained level, though his mind was mapping every movement, every position, every potential threat. "This land's been in my family for 4 generations. We do just fine with honest crops." Behind him, he could hear Rex Hammer Thompson circling, trying to get a position of advantage. The big man's boots left deep impressions in the soft soil. Former linebacker, Daniel assessed, used to intimidating through physical presence. "See, that's the problem with you old-timers." Blade's amusement faded slightly. "You don't understand progress. Iron Valley is expanding. This road, your land, it's all going to be part of something bigger." Daniel watched as Jake Switchblade Martinez examined the nearby tractor, his movements suggesting military background, likely infantry based on his bearing. "Not interested in your kind of progress," Daniel replied, shifting his stance subtly to maintain awareness of both men. Flanking him. "We grow wheat here, nothing else." Blade's face darkened as he stepped closer, invading Daniel's space. "This isn't a negotiation, old man. Iron Valley is moving in. Every farm, every business along this road will be part of our operation. Those who cooperate prosper, those who don't..." He gestured to Hammer, who began examining the nearby irrigation equipment with exaggerated interest. Daniel's voice remained calm, though his muscles had tensed imperceptibly. "Is that a threat, Mr. Hawkins?" The use of his real name caused Blade to pause, his eyes narrowing. "You've done your homework, farmer." "I make it my business to know who passes through this valley," Daniel replied evenly. "Just like I know about the warrants out for you in Wyoming, the DEA investigation into your drug routes, the suspicious fires at farms that didn't cooperate in Nevada." The morning sun had risen higher, burning away the last of the haze, revealing the full scope of Iron Valley's presence around his property. Daniel counted 17 bikes, their riders positioned strategically. Someone in their organization had tactical training, understood perimeter control. Far from the rolling hills of Montana, Maya Foster gripped her phone tightly in the military base's communications center, the disconnected call from her father replaying in her mind. 18 years of Special Forces operations had taught her to read between the lines, to sense danger in the smallest details. The rumble of motorcycles, her father's too casual dismissal, the forced lightness in his voice, everything screamed imminent threat. Lieutenant Carlos Rodriguez entered her office, pausing at the tension in his commanding officer's expression. "Captain, the morning briefing..." Mia's fingers moved across her secure terminal with practiced efficiency, pulling up local law enforcement contacts, traffic cameras, anything that could give her eyes on the situation. "Cancel it," Get me a secure line to Madison County Sheriff's Department now. Back at Willow Creek Farm, Blade's amusement had turned to cold calculation as he studied Daniel Foster with newfound interest. You're smarter than you look, old man. Most folks, they hear Iron Valley's moving in. They don't go digging into backgrounds. Daniel maintained his relaxed posture, though his eyes tracked every movement around his property. Seems to me, anyone moving into my valley, it's worth knowing who they are. The morning sun climbed higher, revealing more gang. Members taking positions around the farm's perimeter. Through the wheat fields, Daniel could see them establishing surveillance points, controlling access roads, professional tactics that suggested military experience. Some of these men weren't just thugs, they were trained operators who'd chosen the wrong path. Mike Watson's call had reached Sheriff Tom Roberts, his voice carrying urgency as he described the situation. Tom, they're all over Foster's place. Iron Valley colors, at least 15 bikes. You know what they did to those farms in Nevada. The sheriff's coffee crashed to his desk as he quickly mobilized his deputies. Jesus, Iron Valley. They've been pushing north, but this... How many deputies you got on shift? 4 on patrol, Deputy Mia Chen replied, already grabbing her tactical vest. Maybe 20 minutes out from Foster's place if we push it. Roberts' face darkened as he processed the numbers. Iron Valley wasn't just another motorcycle gang. They were organized, well-armed, with strong ties to international drug cartels. The farm. Blade circled Daniel with predatory grace, his boots leaving deliberate marks in the freshly tilled soil. You know what impresses me, Mr. Foster? Your reputation in this valley. 3 generations of respected farmers. People listen to you. His smile showed teeth. That could be very useful to us. Daniel's voice remained steady. If you're suggesting I help you establish your operation here, you're wasting your breath. Jake, Switchblade. Martinez laughed, the sound sharp in the morning air. Old man, you don't get it. We're not asking for help. We're telling you how it's going to be. The sun cast strange shadows through the swaying wheat as Rex Hammer Thompson began systematically examining the farm's equipment, his massive frame moving with surprising grace for his size. Shame about your machinery, Blade said softly. Farm equipment so unreliable. Sometimes accidents happen, sometimes they're catastrophic. Daniel watched his lifelong investment being threatened, generations of work hanging in the balance. His voice, when it came, carried a steel that made Blade pause. My daughter once taught me something about bullies, he said quietly. They mistake kindness for weakness, patience for fear. Your daughter, Blade's eyebrows raised mockingly, the one deployed overseas. What's she going to do from halfway around the world? Through the wheat fields, Daniel could see more bikes arriving, their riders taking up tactical positions around his property. Some wore patches identifying them as Iron Valley enforcers, their movements suggesting military or law enforcement background. At the sheriff's station, the Situation Room had erupted into controlled chaos as reports came in from around the county. Iron Valley's been moving north systematically, Deputy Chen reported, marking locations on a digital map. They've been establishing drug routes through agricultural areas, using farms as distribution points. Sheriff Roberts studied the tactical situation with growing concern. How many men can we muster? Chen's face was grim as she checked the roster. Maybe 8 deputies total, if we call in off-duty personnel. But Iron Valley, they're not just bikers. They've got former military, ex-law enforcement in their ranks. Daniel maintained his calm demeanor as Blade's men continued their show of force, though his tactical mind was already mapping escape routes, defensive positions, potential choke points. Through his peripheral vision, he noted which gang members moved with military precision, which ones carried themselves like law enforcement. Valuable intelligence if things went sideways. Think about your neighbors, Blade suggested, his voice almost gentle. Good people been farming here for generations. be a shame if something happened to them, if they got caught in the middle of unfortunate events. Daniel's fingers tightened, imperceptibly on his worn jacket, the only sign of his rising anger. Are you threatening my community now? Just explaining how things work. Blade leaned closer, his breath carrying the scent of expensive coffee. This wasn't some common thug, but a calculating businessman who used violence as a tool. Strong survive, weak learn to bend, or they break. In her base office, Maya Foster was already in motion, her mind racing through scenarios, options, contingencies. Her voice carried absolute authority as she issued rapid-fire orders through multiple channels. Rodriguez, get me satellite coverage of Madison County. Sheriff Roberts, I need eyes inside that farm. I've got assets in the area, former teammates who owe me favors. They can be there in 40 minutes. The DEA has a task force tracking Iron Valley, Roberts offered through the secure line, but they're 5 hours out at best. Mia's fingers flew across her keyboard, coordinating resources, calling in markers. My father doesn't have 5 hours. Listen carefully, I'm coming home. Until I get there, you need to understand something about that farm. What's that? It's not just land, Mia's voice hardened. It's a family legacy, and they just threatened the wrong family. The morning sun climbed higher over Willow Creek Farm as more bikes arrived, their riders taking up positions along the access road, establishing a perimeter that spoke of professional tactical training. Daniel watched their deployment through, the eyes of a veteran, noting their fire lanes, their communication patterns, their hierarchical structure. Iron Valley wasn't just expanding their territory, they were executing a military-style operation. The distinctive sound of approaching sirens cut through the morning air at Willow Creek Farm, their wailing harmonizing with the rumble of motorcycle engines. Blade's face darkened as he moved to the edge of the wheat field, watching multiple law enforcement vehicles approaching along the dusty access road. Daniel observed the gang leader's reaction, noting the subtle hand signals he used to direct his men. Definitely military trained, possibly special operations background. Boss, this ain't right. Rex Hammer Thompson's massive frame tensed as he counted the approaching vehicles. Local sheriffs don't respond this fast. Not out here. Through the swaying wheat, Daniel could see Iron Valley members looking to Blade for guidance, their practiced intimidation wavering in the face of unexpected resistance. Jake, Switchblade Martinez, grabbed Blade's arm, his voice urgent. We need to move. Whatever this is, it's bigger than some local badges. Blade shook him off, his face contorting with rage as he turned back to Daniel, seeing him in a new light. What did you do? Who did you call? I didn't call anyone. Daniel replied truthfully, his voice steady as he watched the gang's perimeter begin to collapse. But in this valley, we look out for our own. Above the farm, the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors cut through the morning air, growing louder with each passing moment. The sound wasn't from local law enforcement. Daniel recognized the unique signature of military aircraft. In the approaching helicopters, retired Sergeant Major Jack "Ghost" Wilson gripped the controls with weathered hands, a grim smile playing across his face. When Daniel Foster called in a favor, you answered, no questions asked, especially when it involved family. 2 minutes to touchdown, he spoke into his headset. Got eyes on 14 hostiles, all armed. Local LEOs approaching from the south. In the second helicopter, former Army Ranger Mike "Shadow" Ramirez checked his gear. They weren't operating in any official capacity, but their equipment was more than adequate for dealing with motorcycle gangs. Copy that. Foster wants this by the book, no cowboys. Back at the farm, Blade's calculated demeanor was crumbling. Your neighbor, the one who ran off? Local cops, that's all this is. But even as he spoke, his eyes tracked the approaching helicopters, recognizing their military profile. Daniel watched the realization dawn across the gang leader's face. This wasn't going to be a simple intimidation job. Through the wheat fields, Iron Valley members began shifting positions, their movements betraying growing uncertainty. These weren't ordinary bikers. Many showed signs of military training, and they recognized when a situation had evolved beyond their expectations. "Boss," Hammer called out, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Those ain't police choppers. That profile, the way they're moving, that's military." Daniel stood calmly in his field, exactly where he'd been when they first arrived. But now, there was something different in his demeanor. Years of special operations experience had taught him to read a battlefield, to recognize when the tide was turning. The gang members who had dismissed him as a simple farmer were starting to realize their mistake. Sheriff Roberts' voice boomed through a megaphone, filling the morning air. "This is the Madison County Sheriff's Department. We have the property. Surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Through the wheat, they could see police vehicles creating a perimeter, officers taking positions behind their cruisers. Above, the helicopters maintained a holding pattern, their presence an unspoken threat. Blade's hand moved toward his jacket, where Daniel had already noted the outline of a concealed weapon. "You think some local cops scare us? We own police departments in 3 states. His voice carried bravado, but Daniel could read the tension in his stance, the calculation in his eyes as he assessed deteriorating tactical options. "Then why are your hands shaking?" Daniel asked quietly. Before Blade could respond, his phone buzzed. The color drained from his face as he read the message. Daniel couldn't see the screen, but he could guess the content. Mia had begun moving. Pieces into play, Jake Switchblade Martinez peered over Blade's shoulder, his own face paling. "Boss, they've got everything. FBI, DEA, they're all incoming. Someone's been building a case." The gang members who had arrived confident in their superiority now found themselves caught in an operation that had clearly been long in the making. Her base office, Maya Foster coordinated with cold efficiency, her screens displaying real-time feeds from surveillance satellites and local cameras. Lieutenant Rodriguez watched in amazement as years of carefully gathered intelligence on the Iron Valley organization began flowing to law enforcement agencies across 3 states. "Sir," Rodriguez said quietly, studying the data flow, "you've been preparing for this." Mia's eyes never left her screens. "The moment they started moving into agricultural communities, I knew it was just a matter of time. Dad would never back down, never let them establish a foothold. So I started building files, making connections, putting pieces in place." Back at the farm, the situation was rapidly deteriorating for Iron Valley. More police units arrived, including state troopers. The helicopters maintained their position, a reminder that this was more than a local police action. "Boss!" Hammer called out, his voice shaking slightly as red laser dots appeared on his chest. "We're boxed in." Former Army Rangers had taken position on the surrounding ridgelines, their presence invisible but undeniable. Blade's face contorted with rage as he realized the extent of the trap. He grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him roughly. "Maybe, but if we're going down, you're coming with us as insurance." The moment Blade laid hands on him, something changed in Daniel's demeanor. 20 years of special operations had taught him more than just tactical planning. His movement was swift, practiced, a simple combat technique that sent Blade staggering backward, unprepared for resistance from a man he'd dismissed as a helpless farmer. "That," Daniel said calmly, maintaining his balanced stance, "was your final mistake." The farm's gate burst open as Sheriff Roberts led the entry team, their movements coordinated with military precision. Above, Ghost and Shadow maintained their aerial coverage, ensuring no one slipped through the perimeter. In her office, Mia watched the feed with cold satisfaction as the Iron Valley members were systematically disarmed and arrested. "Lieutenant," Rodriguez studied her commanding officer's expression, seeing not just a special forces captain executing a flawless operation, but a daughter protecting her father. "You know," Rodriguez said thoughtfully, "studying the tactical feeds, they never had a chance, did they?" Mia's reply was cut off by a new voice on the command channel. Daniel speaking directly to his daughter through the secure line, "Sheriff, Roberts had given him, Mia, everyone's safe. They're all in custody." There was a pause, then, "Thank you, sweetheart." For the first time that morning, Mia Foster smiled because she knew better than anyone that her father probably had the situation under control before she even got involved. As the morning sun burned away the last traces of dawn mist, Willow Creek Farm bore witness to the dismantling of one of the Northwest's most notorious motorcycle gangs. But this was more than just a law enforcement victory. It was proof that sometimes the quietest valleys hide the strongest warriors, and that true strength often wears the most unassuming faces. Iron Valley had come looking for easy prey. Instead, they'd found something else entirely, a reminder that some soil runs too deep to test. The Madison County Sheriff's Station hummed with unprecedented activity, holding cells designed for small-town infractions now contained members of one of the region's most notorious motorcycle gangs. Blade sat alone in an interrogation room, his usual swagger replaced by simmering rage as he watched his empire beginning to crumble. Through the two-way mirror, Sheriff Roberts stood with Deputy Chen, reviewing preliminary reports with growing amazement. The intelligence package Mia Foster had compiled wasn't just about protecting her father. It was a comprehensive breakdown of Iron Valley's entire operation. "Drug trafficking through farming equipment," Roberts muttered, flipping through pages. "Money laundering through agricultural co-ops. Protection rackets in 3 states. This goes deeper than we thought." Deputy Chen entered with fresh coffee and more files. "Sir, FBI's here, and you're going to want to see this. Jake Martinez is talking." In the adjacent interrogation room, Jake Switchblade Martinez sat straight-backed, his military bearing showing through despite years of hiding it beneath a biker's persona. The FBI agent across from him reviewed his file with raised eyebrows. "Army Rangers, 2 tours in Afghanistan," the agent read. "Bronze Star for valor. How does someone like you end up running enforcement for Iron Valley?" Martinez stared at his hands, scarred knuckles telling stories of violence he'd rather forget. Got lost after getting out, couldn't adjust to civilian life. The club, they offered structure, brotherhood. At least that's what I thought I was. Joining. Down the hall, Rex Hammer Thompson paced his cell like a caged bear. Through the bars, he watched other Iron Valley members being processed. Some looked shell-shocked, others angry, but a few, the ones with military backgrounds like himself, seemed almost relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted. Daniel Foster sat in Sheriff Roberts' office, giving his statement with the same calm precision he used to run his farm. Through the window, he could see more law enforcement vehicles arriving, FBI, DEA, even Treasury agents. His daughter's preparation had been thorough. "Mr. Foster," a senior FBI agent said, reviewing her notes, "your actions today helped us crack a case we've been building for years. But I have to ask, weren't you afraid?" Daniel's eyes drifted to the framed photo on Robert's desk, showing him with Mia at her Special Forces graduation. "Fear isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what's right anyway. My daughter taught me that." In her base office, Mia Foster coordinated with multiple agencies, her screens displaying an intricate web of criminal connections that centered around Iron Valley. Lieutenant Rodriguez watched as years of carefully gathered intelligence began, paying dividends. "Sir," he said, studying a financial report, "these shipping manifests, they implicate agricultural inspectors in 3 major states. The corruption goes all the way up." Mia nodded grimly. Iron Valley was just the visible part. Beneath them was a network of corrupt officials, compromised law enforcement, legitimate businesses turned into fronts. Pull this thread hard enough, and the whole tapestry unravels. Back in the interrogation room, Martinez continued his revelation. Blade, he changed the club. Used our military training not for protection, but for terror. Turned brothers into thugs. Some of us knew it was wrong, but by then, he trailed off, looking haunted. The FBI agent leaned forward. By then, they had dirt on everyone, leverage. Blade made sure nobody could walk away clean. Martinez laughed bitterly. Until today, until that farmer showed us what real courage looks like. In his cell, Thompson had stopped pacing. He sat on the narrow bunk, staring at nothing, his thoughts on the morning's events. 20 years in the army had taught him to recognize superior tactics when he saw them. The operation that took down Iron Valley hadn't just been efficient, it had been precisely calculated to minimize casualties while maximizing impact. "Hey, Sheriff," he called out as Roberts passed. "Foster's daughter. She's not just army, is she?" As Roberts studied him thoughtfully, Thompson continued. "The helicopters, the snipers, the coordination, that was special operations work. Seen it before in Afghanistan." His voice carried a mix of respect and resignation. "We really stepped in it, didn't we?" "You have no idea," Roberts replied. "But here's the thing. Captain Foster isn't just interested in taking down Iron Valley. She's offering some of you a way back." In the evidence room, technicians catalogued the contents of Blade's phone, revealing a network of corruption that stretched from local officials to international crime syndicates. The Foster farm had been more than just another target. It was meant to be the first step in establishing a major drug trafficking route through Montana's quiet valleys. Deputy Chen entered Roberts' office with another update. "Sir, we've got 3 more Iron Valley chapters reaching out through their lawyers. They're offering information, trying to cut deals. This whole thing's starting to cascade." Daniel stood by the station's window, watching the afternoon sun play. Across the valley, behind him, law enforcement officers moved with purpose, processing evidence that would dismantle not just a motorcycle gang, but an entire criminal enterprise. His phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "Coming home. Don't start dinner without me." In the main interrogation room, Blade finally broke his silence, but not in the way anyone expected. His laughter carried a manic edge that made even hardened federal agents uncomfortable. "You think this is over?" he snarled at the two-way mirror. "You think taking down Iron Valley changes anything? We're just one part of something bigger, something that'll make you wish you'd never heard of Willow Creek Farm." But Blade's threats rang hollow in the face of mounting evidence. As federal agents coordinated with local police, as former soldiers turned gang members began choosing cooperation over loyalty to a corrupted brotherhood, as Daniel Foster calmly provided statement after statement, a new reality was taking shape. Iron Valley had rolled into Willow Creek Farm, expecting to find another quiet agricultural community to dominate. Instead, they'd found something else entirely, a family anchored by quiet strength, protected by silent guardians, and proof that sometimes the most powerful force isn't violence or intimidation, but the courage to stand against them. As day turned to evening, Captain Mia Foster's helicopter touched down at the Madison County Regional Airport. The same gentle hills that had witnessed the morning's confrontation now bathed in golden sunset. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had insisted on accompanying his commanding officer, watched her face as they drove through the familiar country roads. Mia's expression remained controlled, but her eyes missed nothing, noting surveillance positions, escape routes, potential threats. 20 years of special operations had hardened more than just her resolve. "Sir," Rodriguez ventured as they passed fields of swaying wheat, "about the veterans in the gang. I know what you're thinking." Mia nodded, her voice carrying the weight of understanding. I've seen their files, Carlos. Good men who lost their way. The system failed them, and Blade exploited that failure. At the sheriff's station, Jake Switchblade Martinez sat in a conference room now converted into a makeshift federal task force headquarters. Maps and photographs covered the walls, displaying the full scope of Iron Valley's operations, but Martinez's attention was fixed on a different set of documents, military service records, his own among them. 8 of you, the FBI agent noted, reviewing the files. 8 combat veterans in the local chapter alone, all decorated, all with exemplary service records. What happened? Martinez's fingers traced the Army Ranger's emblem on his old service photo. Coming home, it's like trying to speak a language you've forgotten. The world moves too fast and too slow at the same time. The club, they understood, or we thought they did. Down the hall, Rex Hammer Thompson had been moved to a separate holding area with the other veterans. The change in their demeanor was subtle but significant. The artificial swagger of the gang had fallen away, replaced by something older, more ingrained. Military bearing awakened by the morning's events. They weren't just cops out there, Thompson observed to his former brothers. The way they moved, the precision, that was Spec Ops work. We've been playing at being warriors while real ones were watching us the whole time. Daniel Foster arrived at the station, carrying 2 large containers that filled the building with the aroma of his famous beef stew. The gesture might have seemed incongruous amid the federal investigation, but he understood something deeper, that sometimes the path to redemption started with a simple reminder of humanity. Sheriff Roberts watched through his office window as Daniel began serving bowls to officers and agents alike. "Your father," he said to Mia, who had just arrived, "he sees something in these men that most people miss." Mia nodded, remembering conversations with fellow operators about the challenges of returning to civilian life. He sees past what they became to who they were, who they could be again. In the main interrogation room, Blade's facade had finally cracked. Hours of questioning had revealed the true extent of his organization, a network that stretched far beyond motorcycle gangs, into corrupt agricultural inspectors, compromised shipping companies, and international drug cartels. "You have no idea what you've started," he snarled at the federal agents. "The people I work for, they don't forgive mistakes. Willow Creek Valley will burn for this." But Blade's threats carried less weight with each passing hour. In cells and interview rooms throughout the state, more Iron Valley members were coming forward, trading information for consideration. The veteran contingent in particular seemed eager to shed the gang's colors. Daniel made his way to the separate holding area, a tray of stew in his hands. The guards, on Mia's orders, allowed him to serve the veterans personally. The moment carried weight beyond mere kindness. "My daughter," he said, passing bowls through the bars. "She says you were all soldiers once, good ones." Thompson stared into his bowl, the simple smell of home-cooked food bringing back memories he'd thought long buried. "Yes, sir. Lifetime ago, seems like." "No," Daniel corrected gently, "not a lifetime, just a detour." Mia stood in the task force headquarters, reviewing the evidence with federal agents. The operation had expanded far beyond a simple gang takedown. Financial records pointed to corruption in state agricultural boards. Shipping manifests revealed drug routes disguised as legitimate crop transportation, and behind it all, shadows of larger, more dangerous organizations. "Captain," a DEA agent said, studying satellite imagery of farming communities, "this is bigger than we anticipated. Iron Valley was just the surface. Below them is a cancer," Mia finished. "One that's been growing unchecked for years. Until now." Lieutenant Rodriguez entered with fresh intelligence. "Sir, we've got movement. Other chapters are falling like dominoes. Once word got out about Blade's arrest, the whole structure started to collapse." But Mia's attention had shifted to the holding area where her father sat talking quietly with the veteran gang members. Through the security feed, She watched as hardened faces softened, as artificial toughness gave way to something more genuine. "You know what the hardest part was?" Martinez asked Daniel, his voice barely above a whisper. "Forgetting who we were. The gang. They didn't want soldiers," Thompson added. "They wanted attack dogs. And somewhere along the way, you forgot. You had a choice," Daniel finished for them. "But you have one now." Sheriff Roberts joined Mia at the security monitor. "Your father's something else. Half our interrogators couldn't get them to open up, and he does it with beef stew and straight talk." Mia smiled slightly. "He understands something fundamental. Tom, these men didn't join the gang because they wanted to be criminals. They joined because they were looking for what they lost when they left the service: purpose, brotherhood, structure." As night fell over Montana, the investigation continued to expand. Federal agents coordinated raids across 3 states. Police departments launched internal investigations. Agricultural boards faced federal scrutiny. But in a quiet corner of the station, a different kind of operation was unfolding. The slow, careful work of helping lost warriors find their way home. Daniel Foster had come to the station to give his statement about a gang's intimidation attempt. He stayed to begin something far more important, showing men who had lost their way that redemption was still possible, that beneath the artificial colors of a motorcycle gang, the true colors of service and honor still remained. And in doing so, he proved that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating an enemy, but from helping them remember who they truly are. The first signs of trouble arrived with the dawn. 3 unmarked SUVs crossed the Willow Creek Valley line, their darkened windows concealing occupants whose intentions carried far more menace than local business. In the sheriff's station's command center, surveillance systems flagged their arrival immediately, a security upgrade courtesy of Amaya Foster's foresight. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south, Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, tracking their movement across digital maps. "No plates, professional drivers. These aren't local players." Mia stood at the command center window, watching the sunrise paint the valley in shades of amber. During her years in special operations, she'd learned to read the signs of escalating conflict. Blade's threats about his organization's response hadn't been empty boasting. "They're testing our perimeter," she observed quietly. "Professionals, probably cartel enforcers." The vehicles moved with practiced precision, maintaining exact distances, taking routes that suggested tactical training. In the holding area, Jake Martinez paced his cell, his military training allowing him to pick up on the subtle shift in the station's atmosphere. The increased activity, the tightened security, the tension in the guards' movements. Something was coming. "Hey," he called out to the passing deputy, "I need to speak with Captain Foster now. It's about Blade's connections." Rex Thompson sat on his bunk, watching the morning light filter through the high windows. 20 years of military service had given him an instinct for approaching danger. "They're coming, aren't they?" he asked Martinez. "The people above Blade." At Willow Creek Farm, Daniel supervised the cleanup from yesterday's confrontation with characteristic efficiency. Local volunteers had shown up at dawn, helping to restore order to the fields Iron Valley had damaged. But he noticed the unmarked police car parked discreetly across the road, and the plainclothes officers posing as farmhands along the fence line. His phone buzzed with a text from Mia. "Stay inside today. Trust me." In the station's main conference room, now serving as the task force headquarters, federal agents pored over Blade's seized phone records. The data painted a disturbing picture. Regular calls to numbers linked to the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking organizations in North America. "They've been using motorcycle gangs as frontline distributors," a DEA analyst explained, pointing to patterns on a digital map. "Perfect cover, mobile, intimidating, already operating outside the law. But the real operation is much bigger." Sheriff Roberts entered with fresh intelligence. Just got word from state police. 3 other Iron Valley chapters have been hit in the last hour. Professional jobs, surgical strikes, someone's cleaning house. The cartel was moving to contain the damage, eliminating potential witnesses before they could talk. The motorcycle gang was becoming a liability, and the criminal underworld dealt harshly with liabilities. In his isolation cell, Blade had stopped making threats. His face had taken on a grey pallor as reports of the chapter house attacks reached him. "I want to make a deal," he told the federal agents. "Full immunity, witness protection, before they get to me too." But it was Martinez who provided the key intelligence. His years as Blade's second in command had given him insight into the organization's deeper connections. In the station's interview room, he laid out details that made even hardened federal agents pause. "The farms were just the beginning," he explained, pointing to locations on a map. "They've got people everywhere: agricultural inspectors, shipping companies, local government. Iron Valley, we were just the visible part. The real operation goes all the way to Mexico." Mia studied the former ranger as he talked, seeing not the gang enforcer he'd become, but the decorated soldier he'd once been. "Why tell us this now?" Martinez met her gaze steadily. "Because your father was right yesterday when he served us that stew, talked to us like men instead of animals. He reminded us of who we were before, who we could be again. Outside, the unmarked SUVs continued their slow surveillance of the valley. In the farmlands, expensive trucks with out-of-state plates began arriving, their drivers too professional to be casual visitors. The cartel was mobilizing, preparing to protect their investment in Montana's quiet valleys. But they were about to learn what Iron Valley had discovered the hard way. This community wasn't the soft target they imagined. Thompson stood at his cell window, watching the gathering storm with a soldier's eye. "Captain," he called as Mia passed. "Those cartel hitmen out there, they're good, but they're not military. They don't understand what they're walking into." Mia paused, studying the former army veteran. "And what's that?" "A trap," Thompson replied. "You've been planning this, haven't you? Using Iron Valley to draw out the bigger fish." In the command center, Lieutenant Rodriguez coordinated with federal tactical teams now positioned throughout the valley. Mia had called in more than just local favors. Former Special Forces teammates, retired operators, men who understood that sometimes the biggest threats wore business suits instead of leather cuts. Daniel Foster continued his farm work, seemingly oblivious to the gathering tension, but his movements were purposeful, each action carefully coordinated with the undercover officers posing as farmhands. His daughter had taught him more than just self-defense. As noon approached, the cartel made its first move. 2 men in expensive suits entered the farm's main gate, their casual demeanor belied by the predatory assessment in their eyes. "Mr. Foster," the taller one smiled professionally, "we represent some business interests concerned about recent events in your valley. Perhaps we could discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement." Daniel looked up from his tractor, his expression unreadable. "I already had this conversation with Mr. Hawkins. My answer hasn't changed." "Sir," the second man's voice carried a subtle threat, "I don't think you understand the opportunity we're offering." "No," Daniel replied calmly, pressing the silent alarm Maya had installed beneath his tractor's console. "I don't think you understand what's about to happen." Outside, the trap was already closing. Federal agents moved into position, guided by intelligence from the reformed Iron Valley veterans. The cartel's enforcers, for all their professionalism, never saw it coming. The real battle for Willow Creek Valley was about to begin. And this time, it wasn't just about protecting a farm from a motorcycle gang. It was about something much bigger, proving that sometimes the strongest communities are built not by driving out darkness, but by helping those lost in it find their way back to the light. The two cartel enforcers loomed over Daniel Foster, their expensive suits and cold smiles a jarring contrast to the weathered simplicity of the farmhouse porch. The taller one, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, ran a carefully manicured finger along the railing. "Mr. Foster," he said, his accent betraying South American roots, "you have caused our organization a great deal of inconvenience. The Iron Valley operation was an important distribution hub for us. Its loss is unacceptable." Daniel met the man's predatory gaze with a calm born of decades facing down threats, both on the battlefield and in the quieter wars of community leadership. "I'm sorry for your inconvenience," he replied evenly, "but I'm afraid the people of this valley have no interest in your kind of business." The second enforcer, stockier and stone-faced, placed a hand inside his suit jacket, the gesture a clear threat. "That is unfortunate. Our organization does not take kindly to disruptions in our supply chain. Perhaps you should reconsider your position for the safety of you and your neighbors." Miles away, in the Sheriff's Station Command Center, Mia Foster gripped the edge of the desk as she watched the live feed from her father's hidden cameras. The old farmer's steadfast defiance in the face of the cartel's menace filled her with a fierce pride, but also a sharp fear. These were not the small-time outlaws of Iron Valley. The Sinaloa cartel played by a different set of rules, with brutality as their default negotiation tactic. "Tactical teams are in place," Lieutenant Rodriguez murmured from his position at the comms station. "Snipers have clear lines of sight. Just give the word, Captain." Mia shook her head fractionally, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Not yet. We move too soon, and we risk spooking them. They're just the messengers. We need to draw out the bigger fish." Her father would understand the necessity of playing the long game. After all, he'd taught her the importance of patience in the face of provocation. Back at the farm, Daniel let the enforcer's threats hang in the air for a long moment, the only sound the gentle rustle of the wind through the wheat fields. Then he spoke, his voice gentle but unyielding. "I've lived in this valley my whole life, seen a lot of things come and go. Droughts, floods, hard times and good. And I've learned one thing. The land endures. The people endure. And we do it by standing together." He took a step forward, his worn work boots planting firmly on the weathered boards. The enforcers tensed, hands twitching toward weapons. Daniel continued, undeterred. "You boys are welcome to stay for coffee. My daughter baked a mighty fine apple pie just this morning. But if you're here to threaten my community, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Politely, of course." The taller enforcer's smile sharpened, a humorless slash in the hard planes of his face. "You are making a grave mistake, old man. Our organization is not accustomed to such disrespect. There will be consequences." Daniel shrugged, the movement casual but precise, a lifetime of situational awareness distilled into a single motion. "Consequences are part of life. I learned that the hard way, in places and wars you've likely only seen in movies. But I'll tell you this, there's no consequence I'm not willing to face to protect the people I care about. That's a promise, not a threat." In the command center, Mia released a slow breath. Her father's calm in the face of the cartel's menace was both inspiring and terrifying. This was the lesson he'd instilled in her from childhood. That true strength came not from violence or intimidation, but from an unyielding commitment to what was right. Still, she knew that men like these enforcers only understood one language. It was time to teach them the real meaning of consequence. She turned to Rodriguez, her eyes hard. "Contact our friends in the DEA. It's time to turn up the heat on the cartel's operations. If they want a war, we'll give them one, but we'll fight it on our terms." The lieutenant nodded, his fingers already dancing across the comms panel. "Roger that. I've got reports of increased activity at several of their suspected distribution points. We could coordinate simultaneous raids, disrupt their cash flow and supply lines." Mia turned back to the screen, watching as the enforcers retreated to their sleek black SUV, their postures rigid with barely suppressed rage. Her father stood on the porch, a lone figure against the vast Montana sky, unflinching and unbowed. "Do it," she said softly. "It's time to show the cartel what real power looks like, not just here, but across the country. This isn't just about Willow Creek anymore. It's about sending a message that we won't back down, no matter how big the bully." As the SUV pulled away in a cloud of dust, Daniel Foster remained on the porch, watching until it disappeared from view. Then he turned and walked back into the house, his steps steady and purposeful. There was work to be done, a community to protect, a legacy to uphold. The shadows of the cartel might be long, but the light of Willow Creek would not be dimmed so easily. Not on his watch, and not on his daughter's. The Fosters had always been guardians of this valley, and that duty would not waver, no matter how dark the shadows grew. In the command center, Mia and her team worked furiously, coordinating with law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions, tracing financial links and mapping out the cartel's vast network. It was a daunting task, but one they embraced with grim determination. The battle for Willow Creek was just beginning, but they would not fight it alone. In farmhouses and small towns across America, people were standing up, saying enough to the shadows that threatened their way of life. And in that defiance, that quiet, unyielding courage, there was a power greater than any cartel or criminal empire. It was the power of community, of decency, of the unbreakable bonds forged in common struggle and shared hope. The shadows of the cartel might be deep and far-reaching, but the light of Willow Creek and countless places like it would not be extinguished, not without a fight. And if there was one thing Daniel Foster and his daughter Mia knew how to do, it was fight for what mattered. The battle was joined, and the stakes could not be higher. But the defenders of Willow Creek would not back down, not now, not ever. The shadows might come, but they would not prevail. Not here, not today, not as long as the Fosters and their allies stood tall and unafraid in the face of the oncoming darkness. Jake Martinez sat in the quiet of the sheriff's station interview room, his hands clasped tightly on the worn metal table. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, highlighting the lines etched by years of hard living and harder choices. Across from him, Mia Foster studied the former Iron Valley enforcer with a mix of wariness and curiosity. "You said you had information," she began, her voice cool and professional, "about the cartel's operations in Montana. I'm listening." Martinez took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on a point just past Mia's shoulder. "I never wanted this," he said softly. "When I joined the Marines, I thought I was signing up to protect people, to serve something greater than myself. But when I got back," he trailed off, the memories of a difficult return to civilian life playing across his face. Mia leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. "It's not uncommon," she said gently. "Many veterans struggle with the transition, the loss of structure, of purpose. It's why so many are vulnerable to groups like Iron Valley." Martinez nodded, his gaze finally meeting hers. "They offered brotherhood, a sense of belonging. At first it seemed like a lifeline, but over time the lines blurred. We went from protecting our own to preying on the weak. Blade, he had a way of twisting things, making it seem like we were serving a higher purpose. But it was all just a lie." He took another deep breath, his shoulders straightening as if steeling himself for a difficult task. "The cartel, they're not just using Iron Valley as muscle. They've got people everywhere. Government officials, law enforcement, even some military contractors. It's how they've been able to operate under the radar for so long." Mia's eyes narrowed, her mind racing with the implications. "You have proof of this? Names, dates, specific incidents?" Martinez reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flash drive. It's all here. Shipping manifests, financial records, intercepted communications. I've been gathering evidence for months, ever since I realized how deep the rot went. He placed the drive on the table, his hand shaking slightly. I know I can't undo what I've done. The people I've hurt, the lives I've ruined, but maybe by helping you I can start to make things right, to find my way back to the man I was before all this began. Mia picked up the drive, turning it over in her fingers. The information it contained could be the key to unraveling the cartel's stranglehold on the region, to bringing some measure of justice to the communities they'd terrorized. But it was also a dangerous game, one that could put countless lives at risk. She fixed Martinez with a steady gaze, weighing her next words carefully. If what you're saying is true, this could be the break we've been looking for, but I need to know, are you prepared to see this through, to testify, to face the consequences of your actions? Martinez's jaw tightened, a flicker of the old warrior's resolve flashing in his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. I may have lost my way, but I'm ready to find it again. To be the man my brothers in arms knew, the one my family could be proud of. Mia nodded, a hint of respect in her expression. Okay then, let's get to work. As the interview concluded and Martinez was led back to his cell, Mia wasted no time in assembling her team. The information on the flash drive was a goldmine, revealing a web of corruption that extended far beyond the borders of Willow Creek. But it was also just the beginning. To truly take down the cartel, they would need to be smart, strategic, and utterly relentless. In the command center, the wall of screens flickered with new intel as analysts pored over the data, cross-referencing names and dates with existing case files. Patterns began to emerge, connections snapping into place like pieces of a vast, sinister puzzle. The scale of the cartel's influence was staggering, but so too was the determination of those who sought to bring them to justice. As the hours ticked by, the tension in the room grew, fueled by a potent mix of caffeine and righteous fury. These were men and women who had dedicated their lives to upholding the law, to protecting the vulnerable and the innocent. The knowledge that they had been betrayed, that the very institutions they served had been infiltrated by the enemy, only strengthened their resolve. But even as they worked tirelessly to build their case, Mia knew that the real battle would be fought not in courtrooms or government offices, but in the hearts and minds of the people. The cartel's power lay not just in their guns and their money, but in the fear they instilled, the hopelessness they cultivated. To truly defeat them, they would need to offer something more powerful, more enduring: hope. The belief that change was possible, that justice could prevail, that even the most lost among them could find their way back to the light. It was a belief that had sustained Mia through her darkest moments, a flame that had been passed down to her by her father and his father before him. And so, as the sun began to set over the rugged Montana landscape, Mia gathered her team once more, her eyes shining with a fierce, unwavering determination. "We have a long road ahead of us," she began, her voice ringing with conviction. "The cartel's power is deep and wide, their influence insidious. But we have something they can never match: the strength of our values, the power of our ideals. We fight not just for ourselves, but for the communities we serve, for the people who look to us to keep them safe." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, taking in the faces of the men and women who had become more than just colleagues, but a true band of brothers and sisters. Jake Martinez showed us that redemption is possible, that even the most lost among us can find their way back. It's a lesson we would do well to remember, not just in our mission to take down the cartel, but in our daily lives. We are all capable of change, of growth, of becoming more than the sum of our worst choices. She straightened her shoulders, the weight of command settling easily across them. So let us go forth with compassion, as well as courage, with empathy as well as steel. Let us remember that our greatest weapon is not a gun or a badge, but the unshakable conviction that every life has value, that every soul is worth fighting for. As the team dispersed to their various tasks, a new energy filled the station, a sense of purpose and unity that transcended the weariness of the long hours and the daunting nature of the task ahead. They were no longer just law enforcement officers, but something more, guardians of the American dream, defenders of the innocent, warriors for justice in a world too often ruled by greed and fear. In his cell, Jake Martinez felt a glimmer of that same energy, a flicker of hope that had been all but extinguished by years of bad choices and worse company. He knew the road ahead would be hard, that the price of his redemption would be steep, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt a sense of clarity, of purpose. He had been lost, but now he was found. He had been part of the problem, but now he would be part of the solution. And though the shadows of his past might never fully recede, he knew that he would spend the rest of his days chasing the light one step at a time on the long, hard road to redemption. The pre-dawn stillness of Willow Creek was shattered by the roar of engines and the crackle of radios as a convoy of black SUVs rolled into town, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. In the lead vehicle, Javier Ramos, the cartel's regional enforcer, sat stone-faced, his eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. Beside him, his lieutenant, a wiry man with a sharp goatee, tapped urgently at a tablet screen. "The shipment is confirmed. Our contact at the port says the container will be offloaded within the hour." Ramos nodded, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "And the Fosters?" The lieutenant hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "Our sources say they're holed up at the sheriff's station. The old man hasn't left the farm in days." Ramos' jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath the taut skin. "They're planning something. I can feel it." He turned to face his lieutenant, his expression cold and unreadable. "Double the men at the port. I want that shipment secured and on its way to the distribution hubs within the hour, and put a tail on the Fosters. If they so much as sneeze, I want to know about it." As the convoy sped through the sleeping town, a figure watched from the shadows of a darkened alley. Rex "Hammer" Thompson, his once imposing frame lean and coiled with tension, lifted a radio to his lips. "Blackbird, this is Hammer. The hunters have arrived. I count 6 vehicles heavily armed. They're headed towards the port." Miles away, in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of town, Mia Foster stood before a hastily assembled strike team, her father at her side. Around them, a mix of federal agents, local law enforcement, and carefully vetted civilians checked weapons and reviewed tactical plans. At Maya's nod, Daniel stepped forward, his weathered face set in lines of grim determination. "For months we've watched as the cartel's poison has seeped into our communities, our homes, our lives. They thought they could break us, could bend us to their will with violence and fear. But they underestimated the strength of our resolve, the depth of our commitment to one another." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in the faces of the men and women who had answered the call to action. "Today, we take back what's ours. Today, we show the cartel and the world that the people of Willow Creek will not be cowed, will not be silenced, will not go gently into the night." A murmur of assent rippled through the crowd, a palpable energy building in the confined space. Mia stepped forward, her bearing every inch the Special Forces commander. "You all know your roles, your positions. The cartel believes their shipment is a secret, that their network of corruption will shield them from justice. But thanks to the bravery of people like Jake Martinez and the tireless work of our intelligence teams, we have the upper hand." She nodded to a cluster of analysts hunched over glowing computer screens. We've identified the key players, mapped out their routes and communications. When the trap springs, we'll be ready. A crackle of static burst from a nearby radio, followed by Hammer's voice, terse and urgent. Blackbird, the hunters have reached the port. They're preparing to move the shipment. Mia's eyes narrowed, a predatory gleam sparking in their depths. Then let's move. It's time to show these bastards what real justice looks like. With a final nod from Daniel, the strike team split into pre-assigned groups, each one disappearing into the night with practiced efficiency. Mia lingered for a moment, her hand resting on her father's shoulder. "Dad, Daniel silenced her, with a look, his eyes shining with fierce pride. "I know, sweetheart, me too. Now go give them hell." At the port, an atmosphere of tightly controlled chaos reigned as heavily armed cartel soldiers oversaw the unloading of a nondescript shipping container. Ramos stood at the center of the activity, his face a mask of icy composure. "I want that." "Shipment loaded and rolling in 10 minutes, he barked, his voice cutting through the clamor of machinery, and shouted orders. No delays, no excuses. But even as the words left his mouth, a new sound intruded on the scene. The high, keening wail of police sirens, growing louder with each passing second. Ramos spun, his hand dropping to the hilt of his sidearm, as a swarm of law enforcement vehicles roared into view, their lights painting the pre-dawn gloom in strobing shades of red and blue. "Ambush!" he shouted, his voice raw with fury. "Take defensive positions, protect the shipment." But it was already too late. With a precision born of months of planning and endless hours of training, the strike team descended on the port like avenging angels, their movements swift and surgical. In a matter of moments, the cartel soldiers found themselves outflanked and outgunned, their vaunted discipline crumbling in the face of the onslaught. At the heart of the chaos, Mia Foster moved like a wraith, her weapon barking in short, controlled bursts. Beside her, Jake Martinez and Rex Thompson fought with the skilled ferocity of men who had found purpose in a righteous cause, their pasts receding in the heat of battle. Ramos, his face twisted in a snarl of rage, rallied his men for a desperate counterattack. But even as they surged forward, a new force entered the fray, a phalanx of Willow Creek citizens, armed not with guns, but with an unshakable resolve. Farmers and shopkeepers, teachers and tradesmen, they came from all walks of life, united by a common cause. They formed a human wall between the cartel and their poisonous cargo, their faces set in lines of unflinching determination. And at their head stood Daniel Foster, his eyes blazing with a righteous fire. "Not in our town," he growled, his voice carrying across the battlefield like a clarion call. "Not in our homes, not now, not ever." Faced with this unbreakable front of community solidarity, the cartel forces wavered, their resolve crumbling, like sand before a rising tide. One by one, they laid down their weapons, hands raised in surrender as the reality of their defeat sank in. In the end, it was Ramos who held out the longest, his pride warring with the cold calculus of survival. But as the net of justice tightened around him, even he was forced to concede, his snarl of defiance fading to a rictus of impotent rage. As the sun rose over Willow Creek, its light glinting off the cuffs that now bound the once feared cartel leader, a palpable sense of relief and elation swept through the town. The trap had been sprung, the enemy vanquished, and though the cost had been high, the victory was all the sweeter for the trials endured. In the days that followed, as federal agents poured into the town to begin the long process of unraveling the cartel's network of corruption, the people of Willow Creek began to heal, to rebuild, to rediscover the simple joys of a life no longer shadowed by fear. And at the heart of it all stood the Fosters, father and daughter, united by a bond that had been tested but never broken. They had taken on the forces of darkness and emerged victorious, not just through their own strength, but through the power of a community that had rallied around them, that had stood tall in the face of evil and declared, with one voice, no more. The road ahead would be long, the scars left by the battle deep and slow to fade. But as Daniel and Mia looked out over their town, their people, they knew that Willow Creek would endure, would thrive, would stand as a beacon of hope and resilience. In a world too often beset by shadows, the trap had been sprung, the battle won, but the greater war, the war for the soul of a nation, a people, a way of life, that war would go on. And as long as there were people like the Fosters, like the brave men and women of Willow Creek, ready to stand up and fight for what was right, that war would never be lost. In the aftermath of the cartel's defeat, an uneasy calm settled over Willow Creek. The streets, once haunted by the specter of violence and intimidation, now thrummed with a new energy, a sense of hope and possibility that had long been absent. But even as the town began to heal, Mia Foster knew that the battle was far from over. The cartel's tentacles reached deep into the fabric of the nation, and rooting out the corruption they had sown would be a long and arduous process. It was a challenge she was more than ready to face. But as she pored over the mountain of evidence seized in the raid, a disturbing pattern began to emerge, one that pointed to a threat far greater than she had ever imagined. Buried within the reams of financial records and intercepted communications were hints of a shadowy alliance between the cartel and a powerful consortium of corporate interests. At first glance, the connection seemed tenuous, a few shared shell companies, a handful of cryptic references to mutual benefactors. But as Mia dug deeper, the pieces began to fall into place with alarming clarity. The cartel's operations, she realized, were not just a criminal enterprise, but a key component of a much larger scheme, one that sought to subvert the very foundations of American democracy. It was a scheme that reached into the highest echelons of power, enlisting corrupt politicians, ruthless lobbyists, and morally bankrupt executives in a web of influence and deceit. And at its heart lay a simple, chilling goal: to sacrifice the well-being of the many for the profit of the few. For Mia, the revelation was a bitter pill to swallow. She had always believed in the inherent goodness of her country, in the strength and resilience of its institutions. To see that faith so brutally shattered was a blow that left her reeling. But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion took its place, a righteous anger that burned away the cobwebs of doubt and despair. She had not come this far, had not fought so hard, to let the forces of greed and corruption win the day. With a renewed sense of purpose, Mia gathered her team and set to work, reaching out to trusted allies in government and law enforcement, leveraging every resource at her disposal to build a case against the shadowy cabal that threatened to undermine all she held dear. It was a daunting task, made all the more challenging by the web of secrecy and misdirection that seemed to surround her adversaries at every turn. But Mia was nothing if not tenacious, and she attacked the problem with the same single-minded focus that had served her so well on the battlefield. Days turned into weeks, and the mounting evidence began to paint a picture of staggering scope and complexity. But even as the true extent of the conspiracy came into focus, Mia found herself facing a new and unexpected obstacle. For all their power and influence, the corporate interests behind the scheme were not content to rely on the cartel alone to achieve their ends. They had also forged alliances with other criminal organizations, each with its own network of corrupt officials and willing pawns. The Bratva, the Yakuza, the Triad, one by one, the names of the world's most notorious crime syndicates began to surface in her investigation, linking up with the cartel in a dizzying array of partnerships and rivalries. It was a hydra-headed beast, and Mia knew that confronting it head-on would be a fool's errand. To have any hope of success, she would need to be strategic, to sow discord and disunity among the various factions, to turn their own greed and ambition against them. To that end, she reached out to an unlikely ally, none other than Jake Martinez himself. In the days following the raid, the former cartel lieutenant had proven himself a valuable asset, providing insight into the organization's inner workings and helping to identify key players in the wider conspiracy. But Mia knew that Martinez's knowledge alone would not be enough to bring down such a formidable adversary. She needed someone with deep ties to the criminal underworld, someone who could navigate the shadowy realms where the cartel and its allies held sway. Enter Nikolai Volkov, a former Spetsnaz operative turned black market arms dealer. Volkov was a ghost, a legend in the circles of global organized crime, feared for his ruthless efficiency and prized for his vast network of contacts and informants. Convincing him to join her cause was no easy feat, but Mia was nothing if not persuasive. She appealed to his sense of honor, his disdain for the corrupt elites who profited from the suffering of the masses. And when that failed, she resorted to more concrete incentives, a promise of immunity from prosecution, a chance to start anew, with a clean slate. In the end, Volkov agreed, though not without his own set of conditions. He would work with Mia, but on his own terms, using his own methods. And if those methods sometimes skirted the edges of the law, well, Mia was willing to make certain compromises in the name of the greater good. Together, this unlikely trio, the war hero, the reformed enforcer, and the shadowy operative, set out to unravel the tangled web of corruption and deceit that had ensnared their nation. It was a dangerous game they played, one that required equal parts cunning, courage, and sheer audacity. They worked in secret, gathering evidence, forging alliances, and planting seeds of doubt and mistrust among their enemies. At times, the task seemed insurmountable, the forces arrayed against them too vast and too entrenched to overcome. But slowly, inexorably, they began to make progress, chipping away at the foundations of the conspiracy, one piece at a time. Back in Willow Creek, Daniel Foster watched his daughter's campaign with a mix of pride and trepidation. He knew better than anyone the toll that such a battle could take, the sacrifices it demanded of those who fought it. But he also knew that Mia was a force to be reckoned with, a warrior in the truest sense of the word. And as he watched her rally, the people of the town saw them come together in a spirit of unity and purpose. He felt a flicker of hope begin to burn in his heart. For all the darkness that surrounded them, for all the challenges that lay ahead, Daniel knew that as long as there were people like his daughter, people willing to stand up and fight for what was right, no matter the cost, there was still a chance for a better tomorrow. And so as Mia and her unlikely allies pressed on, as they uncovered new truths and forged new bonds, Daniel held fast to that hope, to the belief that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the light of justice could still prevail. It was a belief that had sustained him through the darkest of times, a belief that he knew would sustain his daughter and all those who followed her lead. For in the end, what was a nation, if not a tapestry, woven of the hopes and dreams of its people? And what was a hero, if not one who dared to hold fast to those dreams, even in the face of those who would see them shattered? These were the questions that Mia Foster and her allies grappled with as they pressed on into the darkness, armed with little more than their wits, their courage, and an unshakable faith in the power of the human spirit. And though the road ahead was long and fraught with peril, they knew that they could not, would not, rest until their work was done, until the forces of greed and corruption had been exposed and brought to heel. For in this fight, There could be no half measures, no compromise, no quarter given or asked. It was a battle for the very soul of a nation, and it was one that Mia Foster was determined to win, no matter the cost. The sun hung low over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold as Mia Foster stood on the balcony of a nondescript office building in the heart of Washington, D.C. In the streets below, the bustle of the nation's capital went on as it always had, seemingly oblivious to the momentous events unfolding behind closed doors. For months, Mia and her team had been working tirelessly to build their case against the shadowy cabal that had infiltrated the highest levels of government and industry. It had been a grueling campaign, one that had tested their resolve and their resourcefulness at every turn. But now, as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Mia felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The evidence they had gathered was damning, the testimony of their witnesses unimpeachable. The time had come to bring the full weight of justice to bear on those who had betrayed the public trust. As she gazed out over the city, her thoughts turned to Jake Martinez and Nikolai Volkov, the unlikely allies who had been instrumental in making this moment possible. Martinez, driven by a desire to atone for his past sins, had proven himself a tireless investigator and a skilled negotiator, able to ferret out leads and persuade reluctant informants to come forward. Volkov, for his part, had used his vast network of criminal contacts to gather intelligence and sow discord among the various factions of the conspiracy. His methods were often unorthodox, and Mia had found herself questioning his motives more than once. But in the end, she could not deny the results he had achieved. Together, this unlikely trio had done what many had thought impossible. They had exposed a web of corruption that reached to the very highest echelons of power, and they had done it without compromising their principles or losing sight of the greater good. But as Mia well knew, victory often came at a price. In the course of their investigation, they had made powerful enemies, men and women who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Even now, as they prepared to present their case to a grand jury, Mia could feel the weight of hostile eyes upon her, watching and waiting for the slightest sign of weakness. It was a feeling that had become all too familiar in recent weeks. The threats, the intimidation, the attempts to discredit their work. All of it had taken a toll, not just on Mia and her team, but on their families and loved ones as well. For Daniel Foster, the price had been particularly high. The cartel, seeking to strike at Mia through her father, had launched a series of attacks on the old farmer and his community. There had been arson, vandalism, even a brazen attempt on Daniel's life that had left him hospitalized for weeks. But through it all, the old warrior had remained unbowed, his spirit unbroken. He had become a symbol of resilience for the people of Willow Creek, a living embodiment of the courage and determination that had seen them through so many trials. And now, as Mia prepared to take the final step on this long and perilous journey, she drew strength from her father's example. She knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, that the forces arrayed against them would not rest until they had been silenced or destroyed. But she also knew that she would not back down. Too much was at stake, too many lives hung in the balance. The corruption they had uncovered was a cancer at the heart of the nation, and it fell to them to excise it, no matter the cost. With a final glance at the setting sun, Mia turned and made her way back inside the building. In a conference room down the hall, her team was gathered, preparing for the final assault on the citadels of power. Jake Martinez, his face lined with the weight of past sins and present responsibilities, looked up as she entered. "Are we ready?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. Mia nodded. "As ready as we'll ever be. The grand jury is convening in an hour. It's time to put an end to this, once and for all." Nikolai Volkov, lounging in a corner with his customary air of calculated nonchalance, smiled thinly. "And what of our insurance policy?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of dark amusement. Mia met his gaze steadily. "The files have been distributed to 12 different news outlets and law enforcement agencies. If anything happens to us, if this case doesn't proceed as planned, the whole world will know the truth." Volkov inclined his head, a gesture of respect from one warrior to another. "Well played, Captain Foster. Well played indeed." As the team made their final preparations, Mia's thoughts turned once more to her father, to the quiet strength that had sustained him through so many trials. She knew that he was with her in spirit, that his love and his courage would be her guiding light in the battles to come. And so, with a final moment of silence for all that had been lost and all that had been won, Mia Foster and her team stepped out into the hallway and made their way towards the grand jury room, ready to face their destiny and to pay the price of justice, whatever it might be. In Willow Creek, Daniel Foster sat on his front porch, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Around him, the town was slowly coming back to life, the scars of the cartel's reign of terror beginning to fade. But for Daniel, the wounds of the past would never fully heal. He had seen too much, endured too much, to ever be the same man he had once been. The battle against the cartel had taken a piece of his soul, just as it had taken a piece of Mia's. And yet, as he gazed out over the quiet streets and the rolling hills beyond, Daniel felt a sense of peace wash over him. They had fought the good fight, he and his daughter, and though the cost had been high, they had prevailed in the end. The corruption that had threatened to destroy their way of life had been exposed. The criminals and the puppet masters brought to justice. The nation would heal, as it always had, and the people of Willow Creek would be there to lead the way. Daniel knew that there would be more battles to come, more challenges to face in the years ahead. But he also knew that they would face those challenges as they always had, with courage, with determination, and with an unshakable faith in the power of the human spirit. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the evening sky, Daniel Foster closed his eyes and offered up a silent prayer for his daughter, for his community, and for the nation he loved. May they always have the strength to stand up for what is right, to fight for justice and truth, no matter the price. May they always remember the sacrifices of those who came before and honor their memory by building a better world for those yet to come. It was a prayer that would be answered in the days and years that followed, a prayer that would become a rallying cry for all those who believed in the promise of America and who were willing to fight to make that promise a reality. For in the end, what was a nation if not a promise? And what was a hero if not one who dared to keep that promise, even in the darkest of times? These were the questions that Daniel Foster and his daughter had grappled with, the questions that had driven them to take on the forces of corruption and greed. And as the night deepened and the stars shone down upon the quiet streets of Willow Creek, Daniel knew that they had found their answer, an answer that would echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring strength and resilience of the American spirit. The grand jury room was silent, the air heavy with anticipation as Mia Foster and her team took their seats at the long, polished table. For a moment, the only sound was the shuffling of papers and the soft creaking of leather chairs as the jurors settled in to hear the evidence. Then, with a nod from the foreman, the proceedings began. One by one, Mia and her team laid out the case they had spent months building. The financial records, the surveillance logs, the testimony of witnesses and informants. They spoke of corruption and greed, of the abuse of power and the betrayal of public trust. Through it all, the jurors listened with rapt attention, their faces a mix of shock, anger, and grim determination. They had known, on some level, that the rot went deep, that the tentacles of corruption had spread far and wide. But to see it all laid out in such stark detail was a sobering experience, one that left many of them shaken to their core. As the hours ticked by and the evidence continued to mount, Mia could sense the tide turning in their favor. The Cabal's defenses were crumbling, their lies and obfuscations exposed for the hollow facades they were. But even as victory seemed within reach, Mia knew that the greatest test was yet to come. The grand jury's decision was only the first step in a long and arduous process, one that would pit them against some of the most powerful and ruthless forces in the nation. The media, ever hungry for scandal and sensation, would be a particularly formidable adversary. Already, the Cabal's spin doctors were working overtime to control the narrative, to paint Mia and her team as rogue agents with a political agenda. They would stop at nothing to discredit the investigation, to bury the truth under an avalanche of lies and disinformation. It would take all of Mia's skill and determination to stay one step ahead, to keep the public's attention focused on the facts and not the noise. But Mia was not alone in this fight. Beside her, Jake Martinez and Nikolai Volkov sat in silent solidarity, their presence a reminder of the unlikely alliances that had made this moment possible. Martinez, once a sworn enemy, had proven himself a true friend and a valuable ally. His knowledge of the cartel's inner workings had been invaluable, his commitment to justice unwavering. And Volkov, for all his shadowy past and questionable methods, had shown a surprising depth of loyalty and honor. Together, they had forged a bond that went beyond mere partnership, a bond tempered in the fires of adversity and strengthened by a shared sense of purpose. They were more than just a team, they were a family, united in their determination to see justice done. As the grand jury filed out to begin their deliberations, Mia felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had done all she could, had fought the good fight with every ounce of her strength and courage. The rest was in the hands of fate, and of the 12 men and women who now held the future of the nation in their hands. In Willow Creek, the news of the grand jury's convening spread like wildfire. The town had become a symbol of the nation's struggle against corruption, a beacon of hope in a world grown dark with cynicism and despair. On the streets and in the shops, people gathered to share their hopes and fears, to offer prayers for Mia and her team. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that the forces of greed and power would not surrender easily. But they also knew that they were not alone, that there were other communities across the nation who shared their values and their dreams. In the face of adversity, they had learned to stand together, to draw strength from one another and from the land that had sustained them for generations. Daniel Foster watched it all with a sense of pride and wonder. He had always known that his hometown was special, that there was something in the soil and the air that bred courage and resilience. But to see it all come together like this, to witness the birth of a movement that could change the course of history, it was a humbling experience, one that left him in awe of the power of the human spirit. As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley, Daniel made his way down to the town square. There, beneath the statue of a forgotten hero, a crowd had gathered, farmers and shopkeepers, teachers and tradesmen, all united in their determination to see justice done. Daniel climbed the steps of the old courthouse, his back straight and his head held high. He had never been one for speeches, had always preferred to let his actions speak for themselves. But in this moment, he knew that his voice was needed, that his words could help to galvanize the spirit of a nation. "Friends," he began, his voice ringing out across the square, "we stand at a crossroads in our history. For too long, we have allowed the forces of greed and corruption to hold sway over our lives, to dictate the terms of our existence. We have been told that this is the way things must be, that there is no alternative to the rule of the powerful and the privileged. But I say to you now that this is not the American way. The American way is the way of courage and compassion, of justice and equality. It is the way of the farmer who rises before dawn to tend his crops, of the teacher who stays late to help a struggling student, of the soldier who lays down his life to protect the innocent. These are the true heroes of our nation, the ones who embody the spirit of Willow Creek and of all the communities like it across this great land. And it is in their name that we must fight, that we must stand up and say, enough is enough to the corruption and the greed that threatens to destroy all that we hold dear. My daughter Mia and her team have taken the first step on this road. They have exposed the rot at the heart of our government, have shown us the true face of the enemy we face. But the battle is far from over. The forces of darkness will not yield easily, and they will stop at nothing to maintain their grip on power. That is why we must stand with Maya, why we must lend our strength and our voices to her cause. We must be the light in the darkness, the beacon of hope that guides our nation back to the path of righteousness. And so, my friends, I ask you to join me in this fight. I ask you to stand up and be counted, to show the world that the spirit of Willow Creek cannot be broken, that the American dream still lives in the hearts of its people. Together, we can build a new future, one in which the power belongs to the many and not the few, in which justice and equality are the birthright of every man, woman, and child. It will not be easy, and it will require sacrifice and struggle. But I believe with all my heart that it is a future worth fighting for, and that together we can make it a reality. So let us go forth from this place, armed with the courage of our convictions and the strength of our unity. Let us show the world that Willow Creek stands tall, that the American spirit will never be conquered, and let us never forget the words of the great patriot Thomas Paine, who said, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." My friends, let us be those who stand by our country, who fight for its future, and who never rest until justice and freedom are the birthright of all. Let us be the heroes that Willow Creek and America need now more than ever. Thank you, and God bless America. As Daniel's words faded into the gathering dusk, a hush fell over the crowd. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind in the trees and the distant cry of a hawk. Then, as one, the people of Willow Creek began to cheer, their voices rising in a chorus of hope and defiance. They cheered for Mia and her team, for the brave men and women who had risked everything to expose the truth. They cheered for Jake Martinez and Nikolai Volkov, for the unlikely heroes who had joined the fight. And they cheered for Daniel Foster, for the old farmer who had shown them the way. As the cheers echoed through the valley, Mia Foster stood on the balcony of a Washington hotel room, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. She had heard her father's words, had felt the power and the passion behind them, and in that moment she knew that they would win, that the forces of corruption and greed were no match for the strength and the courage of the American people. Willow Creek had shown her the way, had given her the strength to fight on. And fight on she would, until the battle was won and the nation was free. For she was Mia Foster, daughter of Daniel Foster, and she would never rest until justice was done. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the story of Willow Creek and the brave men and women who fought to protect it. I hope that this tale of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of a community has inspired you as much as it has inspired me. As we come to the end of this story, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you'll ensure that you never miss a future story or update. You'll be the first to know when new content is available, and you'll be part of a community of listeners who share your passion for compelling narratives and powerful storytelling. Subscribing is easy and free. Just click the subscribe button below this video or on the channel homepage. Once you've subscribed, you can also click the bell icon to receive notifications whenever new stories are posted. By subscribing, you'll not only be supporting this channel and the work that goes into creating these stories, but you'll also be joining a community of like-minded individuals who believe in the power of storytelling to inspire, educate, and transform. So thank you again for listening, and I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe and join us on this ongoing journey. Together, we can continue to explore the stories that shape our world and the heroes who make it a better place.